Hey, this is Sanyam Bhutani, and you're listening to Chai Time Data Science, a podcast for data science enthusiasts where I interview practitioners, researchers, and Kagglers about their journey, experience, and talk all things about data science. Welcome to Chai with Great Thinkers and Researchers, CTDS.show. In this episode, I interview Tim Dettmers, PhD student at UW for the second time on the show. In this episode, we talk a lot about research in general and the personal aspect of research, which isn't covered as much. How you should pick a grad school. Is creativity important in academia? And if these topics sound familiar, Tim has already written blog posts on these, which we discuss in this interview. So you can also check out the blog posts from the show notes. I think we talk a lot about personal side of things while you're going through the process of exploration in research in general or in life in general. I think that's one aspect that has been missing from this podcast. So I hope you love this conversation and it's as insightful for you as it was for me. We also talk about the RTX 3000 series and a few of the issues that were happening at the time of release or at the time of recording, which is we didn't really have figured out how to put multiple of these together. And this intro is being recorded at that time as well. So I'm not sure if these have been solved yet. But now, without further ado, here's the complete conversation with Tim Dettmers. Please enjoy the show. I'm honored to be talking to Tim again on the podcast. Tim, thank you so much for saying yes to my second request.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
So the last interview, for anyone who's watched it, was very insightful about how to approach research problems. But I think you had slightly hinted towards personal side of things. I'd love to dive more. You had hinted towards following passion and alternate paths of education. Would love to talk more about the same and your perspectives on them.
Yeah, of course.
So I know you followed alternate paths as well throughout your research career. You tried Kaggle for a while,
right.
After which you joined in a research program. Is there a hesitancy to that as well because it's not conforming to the reform? How do you avoid that?
So for me, the hesitation was a little bit before that. So even before machine learning, I sort of explored different areas. And I was not totally sure. There are also like sort of often practical bottlenecks. I was very interested in psychology, for example, but I'm dyslexic, so I cannot read and write well. And so I couldn't perform well in the exam, so it was impossible to become a psychologist. And I don't know, over time, I learned so many about different fields, neuroscience, psychology, statistics, and it all came back together into sort of machine learning and then deep learning. And so for me, at some point, it was clear I wanted to do something in that direction, but it was not entirely clear if I want to have like a data scientist job. Do I want to get really specialized to consulting? Do I want to build my own startup? Do I want to do research? And I think there it's also sort of, just experimenting a little bit. So you can see it as like a funnel. And so I funneled further and further into sort of a niche.
Gradient descending into a minima.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's basically the same principle. You try a couple of things, you zigzag around the optimization surface, and you just go further down. And I mean, I think everyone that's getting a bit older and older will tell you that over time, sort of the paths in life, they get more constricted. You can always change, but it costs more energy. And so I think a good strategy is just to explore enough. A lot of people go down one path, then they end up on a spot where they don't want to be. And then I got here and I didn't explore enough. Well, what now? And so On the other hand, people are also afraid. They say, "Oh, I'm 25, I'm 27, and I start my bachelor's degree. I'm really old, and there are all these young people around me." Yeah, I think both cases you shouldn't be afraid of that. I was very old when I did my bachelor's degree and my master's degree. Usually the oldest person in the room, and when we have a meeting on our PhD, I mean, except for the professors. So yeah, I don't know. I'm very happy where I am now, and I think it's a part of exploration and exploitation, finding sort of the things that suit you and are practical, but also sort of exploring the right amount to not get lost in certain details.
How do you find areas where that are fascinating enough but aren't just random interest that will fade away, and how do you continue with that? Because initially when you switch directions, it's frustrating and the initial path is slow, and it's almost very hard to give up the speed or the momentum that you already have in the field.
Yeah, that's a good question. It's not always easy. I also see it sort of with my PhD. When you want to get into grad school, you need to be very competitive, very focused on like, oh, I need to get publications, I need good letters, I need good grades, and all these things. But once you're in a PhD, everything opens up, and you should really do what you enjoy doing. And so I think you have similar balances when you're sort of exploring different careers. And it's maybe a bit more subtle. But yeah, it's difficult. I think what I did is I oriented myself on growth. It was like I was doing Kaggle competitions, and then at first I failed, and it didn't really work. Then I got more skills, and everything worked better. And then I coded my own deep neural networks, and then suddenly I was really well, and I went second place on one competition. And I thought, wow, that feels really good. And I did other competitions, did well, but at some point there's diminishing returns. Yeah, I felt like, yeah, I kind of know how to do it now. Maybe I learn something else. Maybe I explore something else. And so I still go for something that I enjoy and I'm passionate about. But it's also, for me, exploitation stopped when I stopped learning enough. And you cannot do this forever. As I said, you cannot explore forever. At some point, you need to exploit a little bit more. But often people underestimate how much time they have to really do that. And so I think it's also very sort of personal, and it's different from person to person. It's different from personality, but also sort of where they are in life, what resources they have, what people are around them, what community they have. But taken all together, I think if you think a little bit about in those terms, like what do I learn, how do I grow, and do I explore enough? I think that's sort of a good thinking about it. Yeah.
That's a great insight. And even off the record, we were talking about patience in general across any career path. There's always, while exploring a new field, there's this initial motivation, and then there's the final path where you learn a lot. Between there's a lot of frustrations where
Oh yeah.
which is really hard to navigate. Do you think exploring different paths early in your career has helped you even in research? Because research also takes a lot of tenacity.
Definitely. I mean, I was very sort of curious about philosophy, psychology, neuroscience, statistics, and it gives me many insights that other people don't see. If I look at some results, I can very carefully evaluate what kind of knowledge they contain because of my statistical knowledge. It can really dissect what results mean and which results are basically meaningless. You can't say too much about them. It cuts away from this hype. It cuts away through sort of figures and all these things that try to fool you. And I don't know, other fields, neuroscience, it's always nice to understand a bit more how does the brain do it and what can you learn from that. It's not always straightforward. It's very deep learning, and neuroscience is very distant, but you can take some ideas, and you've seen in the literature that some ideas were taken and they were important. And I feel like philosophy always helps in any situation. Just have certain different angle, a different perspective on things, multiple perspectives, hold contradictory thoughts, at the same time, that sort of thing. And so for other people, they will have dabbled in other things. And so they will have different strengths and different weaknesses. But I feel it's always like very helpful to explore in the beginning a lot and then just narrow down over time.
In your write-up of creativity in academia, I think you touch upon this, and you're definitely on the side of creativity. And you had mentioned this earlier as well. Children at a younger age, they really come up with very creative solutions compared to adults who are very conformed.
So that's very curious. If you think about creativity, it's people think it's like coming up with ideas, coming up with novel ideas. And so if you just look at novel ideas, children are extremely good at it. There is this task where you get spaghettis and marshmallows, and you're supposed to build sort of structures and the highest structure possible. And so if you compare adults and children do on average much better, because they don't care about what they build. They just stick things together and they want to make fun looking things, and they're just creative about it. They have no restrictions. So that makes them creative. And adults say, oh, a brick is used for buildings, but nothing else. And sort of that doesn't feel very creative. But all this sort of thinking lags aside, and that you see that particularly in physics undergrads, they often, it's very common that they sort of say, oh, I have the unified theory of everything. I wrote it down. Here's the math. Everything works out. It's beautiful. And then they go to their professor, and the professor gets like annoyed and says like, go away. And you got nothing. He doesn't even look at it because he knows it's just nonsense. And that's because to have certain kinds of creativity, you just need expertise. You first need to understand what is actually a good argument and what is not, what is like a permissible. And so that is actually the other opposite. It's basically the brick taken to an extreme, that a particular brick is only for a particular type of building and not for anything else. And that so because there's certain rules that you need to abide by. And if you don't abide by these rules, it doesn't have any sort of value what you're doing. And so for that, you need lots of expertise, and very few ideas are valid. And creativity is really, really hard. But if you want to think about like general theory of relativity, you cannot be really creative and think, oh, it could be like this or this or this. There's just one way how it's right, and you need to figure out that. And so, I think often we get maybe a little bit depressed to see other people species so creative, especially in sort of other branches like in music. I talk about music, how they combine different genres, and that sort of thing feels very easy. And if you're doing research, it's really difficult to come up with these new ideas. But that's because you need much more expertise in research. It's just at the edge of knowledge. And you cannot just take two things and bunch them together and have a good result. Most of the time, if you do that, it doesn't work. And you need to try it over and over and over and over again. And sometimes maybe it works. And so, this blog post about creativity was mostly about, don't be too hard on yourself. In research and in general, also in engineering, if you in Kaggle competitions, you need a lot of expertise. And so not all solutions are valid. Only few solutions are valid. And creativity is just more difficult under those circumstances.
That's I think a recurring theme from grandmasters as well. I talked to people who had won gold medals, and their perspective was it takes 500 to 600 hours even for some of them to get a gold medal. And these are grandmasters who have been competing for 10 years, and that's almost counterintuitive. I wouldn't take part in a competition if I knew it'll take me 10 years plus that amount of efforts to get into a medal.
Yeah, that's right. And so when I did Kaggle, it was much easier. And it was easier because sort of the expertise wasn't so widely available. So now in Kaggle, like a lot of people just know how to do it, do the basics, basically. A lot of people know much more details. And so you have the same problem that as the expertise gets sort of larger and larger, it gets much more difficult to make this difference with your creativity. In the end, that is what matters. But in the end, that is also, which is just so difficult if things get so competitive and so require so much expertise. And so, I can definitely see that you need a lot of effort, a lot of patience. to really get there. Yeah.
I think you'd agree, and even in your blog post, you'd agree on this, which is we need creativity in academia. How do we leverage the knowledge that already exists? How do we use that to fast track us into creativity? There are many people in academia, and you've discussed this, who look down upon people who are creative. Generally, marketing is looked down upon. In engineering, content creation isn't as expected, but that I think contributes to some extent. But in rigorous academic processes as well, how do you think we can come up with creativity?
So I think, I mean, there are many ways to be creative and different kinds of people, how they work in a different way to be creative. I mean, there are people that just go in the depth and depth and depth, and they just look at a very specific thing, take a couple of things around it, bunch it together and try to find something new. And then there are people that that are a bit more like, I'm also a bit more like that, that dabble a little bit in neuroscience, look a bit here, a little bit there, look a bit in the future and think really, oh, what will deep neural networks be like in 5 years? What will it be like in 10 years? And so what must be true in 10 years? What kind of networks will we use? And sort of, it's a bit big picture thinking. And so you try to get these sort of high level ideas, bring them back to your level, and then integrate them into sort of the local neighborhood in which you work. And so I think that's essentially the crux of creativity. You're in this local neighborhood and you need to draw something in, you need to draw new material, but there are different ways how to do it. Yeah.
And again, that brings us back to the alternate parts of research or even education, which is when you try to combine two fields that are very different, or maybe three fields, and lie at the intersection of them, not at the expertise level, but just at the intersection. That's also a very interesting place to be.
Definitely, yeah. If you, it's actually interesting, if you look at academia and if you look at the people with the most citation, I mean, there are always, of course, it's a couple of outliers, but if you look at the average, the people that have the most citations are the people between fields, because they often can combine ideas that are very distant for two groups of people. And so the difficulty is basically not only understanding the ideas, but then also communicating so that both of these groups can understand it. And then suddenly there's a bridge and all these ideas flow, and all these ideas flow through basically the ideas of this one person or this one group. And so that's where the citations flow, and that's why they have so much influence, because it's so valuable to connect different fields. And similarly, it's always also true in many other areas. If you, for example, have a more rigorous background in statistics, then in Kaggle competition, where some variables are very important, you can do a much detailed analysis, a much more rigorous analysis, and you're much more robust to sort of generalization in the unseen test set, because you have sort of this statistical mindset of really finding the details in the data rather than using a big model or sort of a complicated model or ensembling. And so similarly, if you have other sort of expertise, you can always sort of combine that to just improve get certain strengths in your performance. And of course, you always have certain weaknesses, but I think that's also the interesting thing. We're all a little bit different.
So for someone who's, let's say, inspired by this conversation and they want to try a field that they have not picked up yet, how should they go about it? There are many parts into it. You can read a book from cover to cover. You can take an online course. Which ones do you enjoy personally?
So when I look back, I usually learn the most when I do things. And so if I take an online class, a good example is Kaggle competitions. I took like the Andring machine learning class and Jeff Hinton's deep learning class, and that was helpful, but it was only a start. It was just to get the sort of basic concepts. And if you read a machine learning book, it will not help you to do well in Kaggle competitions. Kaggle competitions is just about practice. and understanding over time, just doing the things, coding the things, experimenting, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't. Read in the forums, see what other people are doing, copy their code, tinker around with it, experiment with it, and see what you can learn. And in
Although
general,
when
go
you
ahead.
when you put it like that, it sounds awful a lot similar to academia as well, to an outsider like me, doesn't it?
Yeah, but I feel like in general, you can also see that this is just a very good way of learning things. Just learning things by books can help, but it doesn't help you if you need to do things. It helps you to understand things. So if you want to give a lecture about machine learning, then maybe reading a book is better than doing Kaggle competitions. But if you want to build models and actually do things, then that's what you need to do. I think you learn the things. To learn the things that you want to do, you need to do them. And so for different purposes, different modes of doing are best, I think.
Absolutely. There's pros and cons to both. Some people agree, some people disagree. Then there are amazing people like you who lie at the intersection and have really great perspectives on both sides. Another point in your journey is grad school, which you're going through right now. You have an amazing
Yeah.
blog post titled "Picking Your Grad School."
Mm-hmm.
Would love to dive into that. How did you go about picking your grad school? I know you mentioned in your post that you're really enjoying. So, what were your key factors while deciding your grad school?
Yeah. In that blog post, I lay out different sort of perspectives, and I use all of those sort of different perspectives to make different decisions. So a lot of people do is sort of, they have a very career focused perspective, and they look at a grad school and say, oh, if I do this grad school and I pick this advisor, then, oh, this person's really famous and publish papers, and then I get to a better sort of school and I become a professor, or I get into a big company and I learn lots of money. And so they have this sort of mindset. But in the end, you spend 5 years in a PhD. This is not really what will be the most fulfilling bit. You can be successful and have many other things as well. And so why should you just choose to be successful? And so people often miss out on other things. I mean, of course, this sort of career perspective is important. And the most important part is really that you have the best fit with an advisor. And so that's what you should mostly care about, basically your advisor. And there's certain advising styles, and you need to understand a little bit yourself. Maybe if you did a thesis before, you already had worked a little bit with an academic and could see maybe what his or her advising style is and if it suits you. And so you could look for something similar, or maybe the opposite if it wasn't so good. And so it's very personal, but it's sort of in this blog post, I try to look at all different kinds of angles, all different kinds of peoples, what they could enjoy. And so you just need to be aware who you are and with whom you work well. And so once you have that, you can narrow it down and can say, oh, these schools with these advisors, they're probably good. But that's not enough. I mean, you should go further. And so what I talk about, which is often I talk about other perspectives which are often forgotten. And that's also very sort of personality based. And so I talk about sort of identity, stability, and variability. And so I talked before about exploration, exploitation. And this basically is stability and variability. So a lot of people focused very, very hard to get into grad school. But by doing that, they missed out on a lot of other stuff in life. And so you just don't want to do always sort of writing papers, doing research. There are more things. And so each school is sort of embedded in a different city, in a different culture. And so are there enough things that you can explore? Are there enough things that you maybe said, oh, I wanted to learn and play an instrument. Oh, I wanted to do bouldering. Or, oh, I like hiking, but I couldn't go on so many hikes. And does the school offer that to you? Can you do the things that you said, yeah, I probably enjoy it, but I never really tried it. And so that is sort of this perspective of, is there enough things that I can still grow as a person, not only in research, but in other areas? The stability aspect of exploitation. If you know, like, certain things are really, really important for me. I have a good friend, and for him it's really important. Oh, he says, I need mountains. I want to ski. And if I don't have mountains around, it's not a good life for me. And so he knows that. And so if you're a person like that, then you choose university where mountains are near. And so that can be a very important factor. If you don't have that, maybe you're successful, maybe you can explore things, but maybe you're miserable because the most important thing that you really enjoyed in life is no longer there. And so, yeah, that's important. And I mean, stability, there I should also say the most important factor are just people. You want to have good people around you. And when you visit a school, you can look at the people. You can see, are there like-minded people? Are there people that sort of I could see myself hanging out with? Also, what is the culture? Do they have sort of social events where you come together and just have a good time? And that doing grad school, which can be quite hard, gives you enough stability to really stick to it and really, just have do a good job, do your good work, live happily, don't be like depressed. Mental health issues are much higher in PhD students than the general population. And so that's an important fact to know. And so stability is an important factor and it should be considered. So beyond these two factors, I also talk about identity. And so when I visited schools, there were some schools where, I met many other students when I visited schools from other schools where I was also admitted. And some of these students are very sort of entitled. They would look around, they would look at your name tag and then see, oh, that university, no, I don't want to talk to that person. And you think twice, do I really want to go to a university where these people came from? Because, and I mean, if you meet one or two persons from that, you say, oh, just this weird person. But if you meet like 10 of them, it gets weird. It gets like, oh, it's probably their culture. It's probably that's how they see themselves. They see themselves as the best. And then the question is, do you also want to be like them? And some people maybe say, they are the best and they should feel like that, but maybe you want to be a bit more humble. And I don't know, when I visited Seattle, I got this feeling that people are just a bit more humble. They're a bit more friendly. If I compare New York with Seattle, it's like such a big difference. Like in New York, people are aggressive and you need to walk fast and you feel
it's a fast-paced life.
Yes. And Seattle much more relaxed and sort of cars let you cross, they wave you over. And I don't know. One thing that I also write in the blog post I found very impressive. And in Germany, that's not common. And in Switzerland, I also didn't see it, is like the people always thank the bus driver. And so you have these very long buses that sort of tilt in the middle, and people are at the end of the bus and they get off the bus and they say, thank you. And it's not just for show, they mean it. You see it in their face. They just want to thank the bus driver. They think this is important. And they say like, this is who I am. For me, it's important to thank other people that helped me. And so, I don't know, that was also appealing. And as I wrote in the blog post, that may seem like strange. Why would you pick a grad school for that? But I mean, now that I am at UW, at University of Washington, I can feel that a lot of people share this sort of sentiment. And it's also, I guess, they have culturally adapted. It's just how people are in the city. It's just how people are at the university. And so it's just a nice environment. And it's just the person that I want to be. I don't want to be the cocky person that looks down on other people and doesn't thank the bus driver. I rather want to be the opposite. And I guess, taking all these sort of considerations into account, University of Washington was the best fit for me.
I also would like to know your thoughts on this. I know you talk a lot about age bringing in patience into life in general. People in my age group, at least when I look around at my peers, we're driven by, hey, I want success. I don't care about life. I don't care about social life. I just want to get to the best university, get the best advisor, write papers that get accepted into best conferences, get a high paying job. maybe it's just my circle, but most of the people that I've interacted with have this perspective. What
Yeah.
advice would you have for such people? Because I think at a younger age, you're more driven to that aspect of life, I think.
Yeah. I mean, you need a balance. It's not necessarily wrong to have that perspective, but you need to recognize that that perspective doesn't age well. There is this, and especially in academia, but in general life, there's this effect where you have a cumulative advantage. So the more advantage you have, the easier it is to get more advantage. And so what that does is, if you get a little bit of head start in the beginning, you just get much easier sort of improvements over time. And you see it mostly with like privilege. If you're born like white, male, and rich, your life is easy. And so if you're disadvantaged and you get to a point where you have a similar advantage, then it's just an easier life. But at some point, there are no longer these benefits. If you have reached a certain level of privilege, it doesn't add up. It just doesn't improve your life much more. I mean, if you don't live in poverty, things are pretty good. And if you can do the things that you sort of love, things are pretty good. And so once you reach that, you should look for other things. You should look for a balance. And a lot of people find it difficult because sort of this race for success, that's what they known all their life.
There's almost this element of regret. Hey, am I missing out on that by not doing this? There's almost this urging regret.
Yes. And I mean, as I said before, there's sort of a balance of exploration, exploitation, but also practicality. And so, yeah, if I don't know, if I look at Indians, for example, they are disadvantaged sort of in the global race for competition. I mean, as a white male, I just have more privilege and it's easier for me. And so, it has some benefit to try to rise to the top, but at some point you need to sort of change direction. And that is sort of difficult. That can also stifle your performance. Strangely enough, if you are successful enough, it doesn't help anymore to strive for success. You need to, I mean, as I said with creativity, it's a lot with exploration. So if you just exploit all the time, at some point it's actually no longer exploitation. It's just almost stupidity. And so it's difficult to find this jump off point where you say, okay, I'm in a good enough spot. Now I need to look around and really broaden my view. And sort of, I think that is sort of, you should continuously reflect, am I at this point? Am I at this point? Or you can also say, is it the other way around, that maybe you explored a lot and maybe you got a little bit disadvantaged. Is it now time to exploit? And so I think overall it's like very difficult to sort of balance that, but it should be a balance. I wouldn't say one side is wrong or the other side is one or the other side is wrong. But it's like a balance that sort of need to be personally assessed over and over again, I feel.
Like you said, it's you should know when you should take your foot off the pedal, and you need to constantly look at yourself, critique what's going on. It's really hard when you're in that mindset, when you have been doing it for so long and you have the momentum to just break free.
Yes, I see it also a lot of PhD students. I mean, grad school is really competitive. The entry requirements are so high. And there are so many people that want to get into deep learning, machine learning, NLP, PhD. And so they need all these lot of papers, so much work, and as I said, good grades and everything. And then they get in and they still have this mindset and they stress themselves out. They do mediocre research because they say, oh, I need to get this paper out. It needs to be out this month. Otherwise, I don't have enough papers this year. And it just leads to bad research. And so it takes those students often like a year or two to readjust and to sort of recalibrate. And I mean, you shouldn't be too harsh on yourself. It just takes some time, especially if you did this for a long time. But you should be conscious of it and you should strive to get to a balance.
For people who aren't maybe that far into their career, how should they pick their research interest? Maybe they're just driven to research in general. They haven't tried the field and they're just going in to explore. How should they pick the areas of interest?
Yeah. I believe that in general, it feels like there are less opportunities than there is demand in research and also in other domains of life. And so often it's about making sort of a balance of what do you want, but also what are the opportunities. Sometimes you meet people where you can learn a lot from them. And maybe it's not exactly what you wanted to do, but maybe it's worth to take up that knowledge. Maybe it's worth to explore how is it to be like this person? How is it to be, how can I think like this person? And that's worthwhile. And so again, there's not really a hard rule, but you should look at things, what you can learn, what you can exploit. Are there certain opportunities which are just worth it, even though it's a little bit different from what you really wanted? I mean, as I said, if you're also very early in your career, it's quite valuable to explore. And so if a good opportunity arises, and it's a little bit different, why not? Just explore it and learn a little bit and then say, yeah, it wasn't quite for me, but I got some knowledge, I got some connections, and maybe this sort of opportunity helps me to go somewhere else. And often it's like that. And so, yeah, it's difficult to sort of give direct advice. It's very personal. Yeah, just look around, see what you can learn, I feel.
In general, you also need to be seated in a good balanced life in order to be
Oh, yeah.
able to go through the frustration of as you explore a field, you get into different directions and maybe you don't love it as much as anymore.
Yeah. It's like sometimes there can be spurts of just going down one path very narrow. And a lot of people do that to get into grad school. But once you're in grad school, you need to open up a funnel. And so it's difficult to make these decisions. Sometimes a balance means a balance over time, not necessarily right now I need this balance.
Yeah.
It's like think a bit ahead, look a bit in the past, look what the situation is right now, look at your opportunities, look what you can learn, look at what you need to do in order to get what's to basically show what society wants you to have, and bring that all together. So it's complicated, but yeah.
That also brings me to the next question. You had this interesting thought-provoking tweet, which is what are the most important problems in your domain? You had just asked people in general. As you've explored the field, what do you think are the important problems in your areas of research and in general, if I may, in machine learning that you find really interesting?
I mean, I have a very extreme position, and that's, I guess, also why I asked in that tweet what other people think. And so my sort of position is that if I look in the past, it just had a lot to do with compute. Sort of the most important things were either very efficient or they just used a bit more compute. And so if I look at, so there's like fantastic analysis of animals, how much neurons they have, and sort of what is their intelligence. And you find that basically it's almost sort of a linear relationship. The number of neurons is sort of very much in line how smart an animal is or how smart we humans are. And so, I don't know, when I look at all this data, for me, it seems that, yeah, we want to use as much compute as we have. We want to use as big of a model that we have. And that's basically also currently my sort of research direction. I work with sparse computing, sparse training. So I specifically work with sparsely gated mixtures for experts. And so these models, you can just grow very, very large, and they still are very efficient to compute. And so they can be 100 times more efficient than a transformer of the same size in terms of parameters. And so that's very powerful. They're also very difficult to train. That's another thing. But I believe techniques in general that sort of try to scale with the resources that we have, and maybe also exploit the resources that we have in a more efficient manner, different kinds of parallelism, that sort of thing, different kinds of training technique, optimizers, There is like a very sort of interesting blog post by also someone from the fast AI community about cyclic learning rates, and they get like super convergence on Cypher 10, I think it was, and they converge within seconds. And I don't know, 5 years ago or so, you needed an hour to train a Cypher 10 model. And so all these tricks put together, I think in the end will lead to a sort of much more interesting model with much more interesting behaviors, like GPT-3, but just even orders and orders of magnitude larger. I think for me personally, that is sort of the most promising, most interesting direction. Maybe some people say it's also very boring, it's just scaling. But if you look at the details, there are many interesting problems which are difficult to solve. Yeah.
And just want to drop a plug for the previous interview where we've discussed this in depth along with your recent work at that time. So for the audience that'd like to know more about that, I've also really enjoyed your tweet storms on transformer models, and I'm sorry, I'm an outsider. So to me, it looks like these are in the opposite direction of your research. Why did you decide to explore these? You've been exploring these for a while, I think.
Yeah, so I mean, what you're referring to, that was like transformers on smaller data sets. And so there is a paper by OpenAI, and it looks at the scaling laws of neural language models. And so what they show is if you have a certain size of a model, if you have a certain number of data, then you can predict sort of what will be your loss be with a transformer. And they show a certain scaling. And so if you look at that relationship, then it seems very plausible that you can do most of the research with smaller data sets, because the results will sort of extrapolate to the bigger data sets. So if you know the performance on smaller data sets, a couple of data points with different model sizes, with different data set sizes, you can predict what will this model look like if you have a very large data set, a very large model that you can never train, but you can predict and say, probably a model will look like this. If I have this model with this sort of architecture, a big model will look like this. And so with that, you expect that transformers should probably also do quite well in small data sets. And there were some results published which showed, yes, they are competitive with LSTMs, even a little bit better. That was Transformer XL. And so nobody could replicate those results. And it was very frustrating. And I talked with like many colleagues, and they said, yeah, we cannot replicate the results. The authors do not reply, and everybody knows that. And so on Twitter, somebody was like confused by that and said, are these results real? And I basically say, no, these results are not real. We cannot replicate it. And colleagues also cannot replicate it. And so that sort of escalated into a replication challenge, and the authors replied, and sort of I implemented sort of their suggestions, and I could figure out how to actually train a transformer on a small data set. And so there it's sort of very important to use a lot of different regularization techniques, not only dropout, but also special kinds of dropout on the inputs. And that sort of artificially makes your data set larger in a sense. It's not sort of a very high quality larger data set, but the introduced noise helps a little bit. Similar how you would, for example, use cutout in computer vision to augment your data, to basically get different versions of the data. And so in the end, that was a missing piece. And so with that, you can actually say, yes, transformers are plain better, probably for most data set sizes, but you need to use very complex regularization to improve over LSTM performance.
It was almost funny. Sasha Rush, I think they had opened up a bounty, and the authors claimed it by just uploading their code.
Yes. Yeah, I was curious. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I emailed him, and a couple of other people emailed him, and then there was bounty, and a couple of minutes we had the code. So maybe sometimes you need to give people a bit more incentive.
Interesting. Otherwise, in general, have you explored more ideas of training transformers on smaller data sets outside of that experiment?
Yeah, I have currently a running experiment, and it's a little bit similar to sort of this scaling laws paper from OpenAI. And I use it for architecture search. Yeah, and results look promising. And currently the project is just off ice because I switched to a different project, but I might publish it in the future. Yeah.
Okay, looking forward to that. I'll have Tim's Twitter handle in the show notes. He's very active whenever he comes up with a research idea. You can probably find it there. Now, coming to the burning topic, at least at the time of recording, this would go out in a few weeks, but which is the RTX 3000 series. It's almost overhyped that you're just getting thrown with so much content on these. What's your GPU recommendation in I think it's September 2020. What's your recommendation today?
Yeah, so actually the recommendation changed today or yesterday. There more data came out, and it seems to be confirmed that there is sort of a performance limitation on the RTX 30 series, which is just similar to the RTX 20 series. And so what they do is, so basically NVIDIA knows that if they enable all the features of the normal architecture on these GPUs, then nobody will buy Quadro cards. Nobody will, or only few people will buy Tesla cards. And so they cannot sell these professional cards. And so what they do then is limit the performance a little bit.
I'm sorry, for people who don't understand, can you tell the difference between the Quadro cards and the RTX cards?
Mm-hmm. So the RTX cards are mostly designed for gamers. Of course, people like us just use it for deep learning, and it works pretty well for that. But NVIDIA doesn't like that. NVIDIA wants it to just for gamers, and these data sets were banned for data centers. So you're no longer allowed to put them in data centers. Some like nonprofits and universities, they can get an exception for that. But usually they don't want to have these gamer GPUs in data centers. And so there are the Quadro cards, and NVIDIA says, oh, you should buy the Quadro cards and the Tesla cards. They're much better. They're perfectly designed for professional people and for researchers, and so just buy them. They just cost 10 times the price or 6 times the price, and they're great. And I mean, if you look at their performance, in the past, they were not better than the gaming GPUs, but just 6 times more expensive. So who would buy that? Nobody. And so NVIDIA needed to put some incentive on for people to buy these cards. And so it seems that in this series, again, they sort of went for the option to limit the performance a little bit on RTX 30 series cards. And so that makes upcoming Quadro cards more attractive because they just can compete. They just offer a bit better performance, and makes Tesla cards more attractive. They have just better performance. And so that's what you get when you have a monopoly. They can just do the things to control market segments as they wish. And
At the time of recording, the Quadro cards aren't out, and I know in the next week the GTC conference is coming up. But in general, looking historically, do you think the difference is just diminishing? Is it in any sense worth it to go for the Quadro cards?
Yeah. So if you compare the RTX 2080 Ti and compare it with these Quadro RTX cards, you see a similar performance. You will see a similar performance difference to the RTX 3090 or 3080, and compared to these new Quadro cards that will come out probably soon. And so you can expect sort of a difference about similar to that. The A100 is a bit different GPU. It's much faster, so the Tesla A100, but also much more expensive. So yeah, there you cannot make like the straight comparison, but you can expect sort of the Quadro cards and the RTX card to be comparable to the last series, basically in a relative performance to each other.
Okay. And apart from that, in general, you have recommended to still look at older used cards. Which cards do you recommend for different use cases? I know you have it on the blog, but just want to cover that on the podcast as well.
Yeah. So I mean, sort of in the light of these sort of updated results, if you have like already an RTX 20 series card, it probably makes not so much sense to upgrade actually. only if you need memory. If you have other use cases like Kaggle or trying to learn deep learning or just try a couple of things out with deep learning, you don't need a big GPU. And so you don't need a RTX 30 series. And so there's sort of different options. There is like one GPU, I think it's a GTX 1050. It doesn't need an external power supply. So if you have a computer with like a power supply that has enough wattage, you can just plug it into the main board if you have a slot. You don't need new components. You don't need a new machine. Just plug in the GPU and you can work a little bit. This is only enough to sort of try a couple of things out, but you can get a taste for it. And if you like it, you can invest into a real machine. So that's like very cheap option. Beyond that, I would recommend Tensor Core enabled GPUs. They just give you better performance. And
I'm sorry to bring up the stupid question again.
Yeah.
What is a Tensor Core for the uninitiated?
Yeah, so the Tensor Core is basically a special unit on the GPU that's just designed for matrix multiplication. And so usually what a computer does, it sort of queues up all these sort of floating point operations like A times B, and it has a lot of them in parallel, and it computes all of them, but sort of each computational unit can just compute one of them at a time. And so what a Tensor Core does is it doesn't compute one at a time, it computes entire matrix products of 4 times 4 multiplied with 4 times 4 matrix. These are a lot of multiplications, a lot of additions. And it does it like in the same time as a normal core would process basically a fourth of a single floating point number. So very high throughput. You can put it through a lot of matrix multiplication sort of compute through this core. And so you can say roughly one Tensor core is as powerful as like 50 normal cores. Where, I mean, you see these specification with CUDA cores and Tensor cores. You shouldn't really look at CUDA cores. It's a bit more complicated than that. But in other words, Tensor cores is just very powerful compute units that compute very quickly matrix multiplication and also convolutions that are represented as matrix multiplication. So for deep learning performance, absolutely critical. They speed up your networks quite a bit.
Which graphic cards have the Tensor cores, the RTX series and beyond, or before that as well?
So the RTX series and sort of after it, there are some special sort of GPUs, but I think they have the GTX pre-flag. So I think there's the GTX 1660, for example. It doesn't have Tensor cores. So as long as the name has RTX in it, I think you can pretty sure that it has Tensor cores.
So many people, at least in India, we don't have the used market as big. When we're looking at buying a new GPU, which number should we look at? A lot of it is marketing this memory that has a stupid amount of GBps, which doesn't really make sense. What numbers should we really look at while trying to compare these? Because just want to point out that there's so many AIB cards as well, which have the core numbers are the same throughout most of them, just that the frequency changes a lot. So how should we compare these when trying to buy a new one?
Yeah, so in general, I would say if you have these different versions of GPU with super clocked and higher megahertz and that sort of thing, ignore that. And just look at the GPU name. That's important. And basically what the name stands for, and that's the memory. And the most important factor is a memory bandwidth. And so first you should look at or think about what things do I want to train? What things do I want to do with this GPU and how much memory does it require? So if you just do inference and want to train YOLO and just use YOLO for something, you don't need much memory. Inference is very cheap. If you want to train networks, it depends if you want to train on small data sets or if you want to train a big transformer on a very big data set. And that sort of makes the difference between 8 gigabytes of memory is enough or 24 gigabytes feels kind of small. And so, you need to first think about that. Once you have that, one of the best options is to really look at the memory bandwidth. And so just look at your budget. What can I afford? and then what is a GPU with the highest memory bandwidth that fulfills my memory requirements that I can afford. You can also look at my blog post where they list cost performance. And so I think in general, that's what's most interesting for people. They just want to know, oh, I have this budget. What's the best GPU? What gives me the best performance? And with that chart, you can sort of figure it out. But as I said, first, you should make sure that it has enough memory. That's first requirement.
But Tim, in general, outside of your blog post and these two interviews, we don't have many resources. And when you try to look up AIB cards, you always get thrown with the numbers of, hey, this one cools better, this one is slightly faster. Do they really matter in your experience?
Yes, but it's optimized for gaming. So that means usually if you have one GPU, these cards really cool better. And so you see it also in crypto mining rigs. They have certain fans that they prefer because they run cooler, and also because they can replace the fans more easy. They can get like China-made fans and just replace them when they break. But the thing is, if you stack them next to each other, then some of these designs don't work so well anymore. And so that is often not considered. And so in the last sort of founder series of NVIDIA, they had the problem that single GPU cooled very well, but if you pair it with multiple GPUs, it cools terrible and it overheats. And so in my computer in university, I have extenders, so cables that extend the GPU, so you don't have to put it in a slot. And so if you have that, there's just enough space between GPUs, and then you have better cooling performance. So yes, these temperatures do increase. Certain fan designs are better, but it depends how much space is there between GPUs.
So let's say, and I know many people in research are excited to get hands on two 3090s. Would you recommend going with two highest end gaming ones in case we want to stack them together? And I guess it's really interesting because no motherboard right now properly supports putting two of these together.
Yeah, I mean, the 3090s, they will cause a lot of headache. You have power problems, you have heating problems, you have space problems, and then the performance is not that great. They are cheaper than RTX Titans, and RTX Titans are also no longer produced, so it's difficult to maybe find them. Maybe you can get
stuck with them mostly.
Say again?
You stuck with the 3090s for the most part, I guess, for the research community.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, if you have like 2080 Ti's, I would probably not upgrade, only if you need the memory. So if you really choose the 3090, then you need to do a couple of things. First, you need to upgrade your power supply to the highest level. You need to get a version that has a 2-slot design or the 3-slot design. I saw some cooling numbers from this new design. It's really good, but it's just 3 slots large, so you cannot run 4 GPUs. I mean, if you only get 2 GPUs, totally great. But if you get 3 GPUs or 4 GPUs, it will be quite difficult to run that cool. And right now, it's unclear what the best option is. I think with the cooling numbers, probably the smartest option is to buy extenders and distribute them in the case. But then you need to make sure to get very big case, so you have enough space to spread them out. And some people suggested like mining rig cases, which are like open air, and other types of cases, so no longer like real normal desktop cases. And so, I mean, now that I'm talking, you already see there's so many problems.
Yes.
And then there comes even more problems. So in a lot of like US households and maybe also in other countries, sort of the power socket doesn't support enough power to support one desktop with 4 3090s. So you cannot even run it on a single socket with a single socket. So you either need to get 2 power supplies, spread them out, or you need to power limit the GPU, which is currently an untested solution. On my blog post, I show it is a possible solution. It will probably only reduce your performance a little bit, but it's experimental. And so I'm curious when people build these sort of setups and they will report back and say, yeah, that works, or hey, that doesn't work. So that information will be very valuable. But right now, as discussed, there's so many issues, so many things to figure out, and so many things that can go wrong. And so for most people, I would say wait until people build these things and wait until people report back and say, okay, this works and this doesn't work, and here's a problem, and oh, we need to figure that out. And once all of that is digested, I think we know what you need to get a setup like that.
For extenders, it's kind of scary because you buy this really expensive graphic card and it's just hanging out on the side of your case. At least that's how it appeared in the picture.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's a bit disorganized. I think if you can, if you put a bit more effort into it, a bit more thinking and planning, you can get a better case. There are some cases where you can nicely mount sort of extenders, and some extenders have like a base which you can nicely attach to a case. And so you don't have these free floating GPUs that sort of hang in all these cables. I also didn't get extenders that were long enough. I thought I had a long enough extender and I sort of measured, but then these things bend. They can be quite stiff, and I don't know, you need to find the right spot in the case, and sometimes there's just not enough space. And because all these power cables, you need to also think about that. And so I think if you do it carefully, you can make it work, make it look nice, and it will feel safe. But if you do it like me, then it's a bit disorganized and chaos.
That's a very honest answer. So for cases, you've also mentioned, and I'm asking these questions because a lot of us have been discussing this constantly since it was announced. So again, these are all theoretical questions, but cases you mentioned only help reduce 3 to 4 degrees Celsius temperature if you get a very good case with good airflow. So which case should we really get? Again, it's also size problem with the 3090 because you need to make sure A, you can fit the motherboard, B, you can fit 2 of these nicely. Which case should we look at?
Yeah, so I don't have any specific recommendation, especially with the 3090. So I think it's also a little bit longer than other GPUs. And so a lot of cases only support like 3 GPUs with double slots. So you have a motherboard with 4 slots, but then the last slot is so close to the case that you cannot mount a GPU there. And it's very common. At University of Washington, I've seen a lot of cases where this is the case. They cannot mount the 4th GPU.
It's the same case with this, same situation with this case as well. As you can see, there's a PSU shroud right around here.
Yeah.
And this is a 2080 Ti, but it's a 2.5 slot card. So literally it's useless beyond a single card.
I see. Yeah. And this is like very difficult to figure out.
And no one has talked about this, which has really upset me because I was on this rabbit hole of just trying to find the answer. I couldn't.
Yeah, that's right. My strategy is sort of to do a Google search for 4 GPU rigs and see, okay, they have enough space there, and so then look at which cases they have, and then sort of reverse engineer, okay, if I get this case, I can fit your 4 GPUs because they could fit it, so I can fit it. And so I think that's sort of secure, but there are few cases that support this. It's difficult to do, and especially with the new GPUs, it's more uncertain because you cannot search for an image for that. So you need to be very conservative. Look at the biggest case that you can find. Look directly on the sort of where's the motherboard mounted, how much space is there, and sometimes it makes sense to just step away from that and just think about sort of a mining rig or even a server sort of case. And so, currently it's not clear what's the best solution. I think time will tell, but be conservative in the case.
Another theoretical question, but if you'd like to answer this, most of the motherboards, some have a good spacing, mostly the hyper expensive ones, which force you to get a Threadripper, which makes sense if you're getting 2 of 3090s. So how much space would you recommend if someone is too scared to just use extenders? Do you know if one PCI slot space between cards is helpful in general? Again, it's a theoretical question because 3090s will heat up a lot more since they go up to 400 watts. But
Yeah. So without extenders, it's difficult to say how how the 3090 or 3080 or even 3070 will perform when they're right next to each other. So I think these cooling numbers that I saw, they are really from a single GPU, so not a multi-GPU setup.
Yes.
It seems that the NVIDIA standard design has both blower and a fan, and the fan sort of can circulate through the other GPUs. So it seems that there should be some airflow, but I'm very skeptical. These GPUs have much more power. They radiate much more heat. And so if they're very close to each other, what can you expect if you have a certain spacing? What can you expect in certain designs? And so I would just recommend most people wait for other people to figure it out. Right now, it's a bit risky. I mean, what I read is that the 3090 sold out already. So I guess most people have to wait anyway a little bit. And so let other people figure it out first.
Just want to mention for the curious that older generation cards also have this semi-blower design, not the blow-through design, but at least the gaming card I have, it also is a hybrid of sort. It blows hot air downwards and also through the back of the case. So if you're really curious, you can look at multiple cases of these ones where people are using multiple of these. But
yeah, I didn't know about that the design like that existed. So that's a very good data point. So if you find some temperature numbers on people that have a rig like that, that's probably a good indicator. It seems that the NVIDIA design is very sort of complex. It seems to have a lot of more radiators and that sort of thing, a lot of more pipes. But it's probably, if you compare the standard sort of third-party vendor GPUs with sort of this design, what you have there in a 4 GPU setup, and you look at the differences in temperature, probably that is comparable what you can see sort of in NVIDIA GPUs. Yeah.
But again, like you said, and I'm sorry for asking so many theoretical questions. I guess the best thing is to wait. Another theoretical question that is also lurking in the community, I promise this is the last one, is blower edition graphic cards might not work at this wattage. Do you think that might be the case? So people are thinking of waiting, or if they shouldn't wait, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So in general, blower cards run hotter. They have the advantage that they can get rid of the air. But if you have an extender and like a founder edition GPU and a blower GPU, the founder edition will just be cooler. It is just a better cooling system, but not if there's no space between the GPUs. And so that's correct. Maybe blower designs will not suffice. And so I guess maybe what NVIDIA's design that they sort of had took these things into account, and they have both. And so maybe you need both, and very sort of streamlined design, very complex cooling design. But yeah, so I think their design with the extender is probably the best cooling solution. And if we can just figure out a nice case and a nice extender that you can mount safely, I think that's probably the solution that most people would be happy about. There's very little risk. Everything is stable, and cooling will be great.
I hope so. I'm sure we can. The audience can stay up by just following you on Twitter, because I know you'll share it when you find out.
Definitely, yeah.
Usually, my last question is asking for best advice. I've already asked that to you. Do you have any general thoughts for people? Otherwise, based on the conversation we have, any new perspectives on best advices for people just starting out today?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, we talked already like a lot about how to sort of explore your career, and you need to have different perspectives. You have a different balance, and you have a different balance for different people because they do different things. Maybe some person exploits too much, some person explores too much. In general, it's difficult. I feel like one bad advice that I often hear is just follow your passion. Passion is important for endurance. Passion is important to stick to something that's really difficult. But it's not the only thing. You need to consider other things. Society wants you to do certain things, and it just rewards certain things, but not other things. It just, society says, oh, I don't care about this. I don't think this has value. And so then you also need to take account a little bit of that. You shouldn't be naive and just follow your passion. It needs to be a bit more balanced approach. You need to look at different angles. And so I think my overall advice is to be open to different perspectives on your career, and vary things a little bit over time. I think a little bit of variance is always good. And just sort of reflect. Don't be a zombie that follows a path. Reflect every now and then to listen to yourself and say, am I in a good spot? Do I like this? Is my career headed in a good path? Am I constricting myself too much? Do I run into a trap? All these sort of kind of questions. And so I think if you rounded up all these things, probably things work out quite well.
That's one of the best advices to end an interview on, at least on this series. Before we end the call, if you'd like to mention the platforms where you're active for the audience to connect with you.
Yeah, I'm active on Twitter. There you can follow me. It's Tim_Dettmers. My blog post is timdettmers.com. And as said, so if new information becomes available, or if I have new research, I usually post on Twitter a small summary. Sometimes I also post like a small blog post. So as I said, update my GPU blog post if new information becomes available. I think these are the best sources to get in touch with me or to follow what I do. To get in touch with me, you can also email me. You find the email address on my blog. And I'm also always happy to have comments. My blogs have quite a bit of comments, and I'm also happy to discuss a couple of details. So if you want to have a burning question, just leave it on the appropriate blog post.
For the lazy people, there'll also be links in the show notes if you just want to click on that, and if you don't want to search Tim's name. Tim, thank you so much again for such an insightful interview and such an amazing perspective on grad school, and for answering a few of the burning questions as well for the 30 series.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed the show, please be sure to give it a review, or feel free to shoot me a message. You can find all of the social media links in the description. If you like the show, please subscribe and tune in each week to Chai Time Data Science.